Okay, cool. So we're gonna talk about Libra. Libra, I balance, therefore I am. I actually wrote that myself. These are not like official uh, verbiage for them, but I really do see Libra being the sign that needs to be able to balance people in order to actually be at its best self. It needs to balance itself as well. So, accessing your chart, you can go to AstroSeek. I also put that in the chat. And I'm using whole sign health system to keep it simple for people to really just focus on their planets. I use both. I use whole sign when I just want to get an immediate read for the person, and then I'll use Placidius when I look at specific events. It's more time based to me because of the equator and the changing of the equinoxes. So that's the way I look at it. And if you don't know your time, you can also use the unknown time. That just hinders your ability to see your houses where they probably are. And yeah, so we're talking about Libra. Libra is the seventh sign in the zodiac, and it is ruled by the planet Venus. If you do have the chart pulled up with the wheel, it's usually over here in this portion. I'm going to pull up a wheel right here. But if you are an Aquarius rising, then your seventh house, where Libra usually rules, is actually ruled by Leo. So that's something to keep in mind. Depending on your rising sign, that will affect the house. But yeah, let's dive into it. So Libra season starts on the 23rd of September and it lasts until October 22nd. If you're in between that, I'm sorry, you're either born at, you know, the 23rd of October or the 22nd. You're either a Libra or a Scorpio. Just not to confuse yourself, to call yourself a cusp, because those don't exist. So Libra is an air sign, and it is very much related to social interaction, social communication. I like to call it social control. All air signs are rooted in their ability to communicate, and I think about the air signs as actually the human signs in astrology, like the actual essence of humanity. And I'll dive in a little bit more into that as we continue this. But as I said, it's ruled by Venus. Venus itself is very much about your values. It's very much about what it is that you're looking towards in your relationships, and we'll dive into that later. And then also the symbol of Libra is the scales, because in my opinion, I think Libra really is, balancing light and dark. Uh, Something really cool is that the seventh house is, you know, it's like part of the equator in the zodiacal wheel. So it's literally between night and day. And that's something that I'll be teaching in my private class about like night and actually day and how the type of chart that you have based upon where the sun is between 1 through 6 in your chart or between 7 through 12 and how that has effects. So, the goal of Libra is to be the center. And I think Libra, in that sense, can be very spiritual when they finally balance themselves. Because if they do balance themselves, they then become that rock and balance for other people in their friendships and also their relationships with people. I love those big three. Scorpio moon, always nice to see one. So, solving conflicts is a very good positive thing for Libra. It's very diplomatic. I also think about it that Libras are definitely going to, like Libra and Aries. Aries is the polar opposite of Libra, it's usually the first house. And I think that they're both the same way. I know a lot of people will say that Aries is the one that likes to be aggressive and actually initiate. And I do think that Libra does the same thing because when you are in a socially awkward setting and you're doing something that fits you outside of like what should be done, if you are friends with a Libra, this might be the small difference. They will immediately call you out on what you're doing because you're disturbing the peace, you're disturbing the harmony. And they have a really subtle way of getting you to understand that, which is why I think that like the whole idea of them being charming is very true. They can definitely know how to, without verbally saying it, like just give you the social context. And for that reason, they are the balance. Setting up a party or going to a social event without a Libra is kind of like you're kind of losing out on a really big part of it. Being able to go from person to person and make all the guests feel understood, but also Libras are seen as politicians and or diplomats because of this reason, their ability to go from person to person. And Libras get called fake for this a lot, but I don't see it that way. I just think with all the air signs being the human signs, you have to understand that human beings are a polarity and we are good and bad, right? Moral, immoral, whatever it could be, there is a balance that human beings always strive for when they do get into interactions. The first time you meet someone, is this person respectable enough for me to actually give them my earnest and true and kind self, or are they not respectable? Are they kind of push offy, and I'm going to give them the side of me that doesn't tolerate that, right? And that's a perfect example of the balance. So now to the flip side of that, sometimes Libra can be very indecisive. And I think that comes with, because you see both sides and playing devil's advocate, it can be very difficult when I always call it like spineless Libras or not fully Libra because of the balance. A Libra that does not truly think as much as it can about the actual situation versus the feelings of the person is always going to be leaned towards people pleasing and therefore unbalanced, because then they struggle to make those decisions, and those decisions are probably things that they need to do so that you can get to the root of the matter with them. But without that, then they won't be able to confront things. They won't be able to actually say what it is that they need. And I say this time and time and again, Libra is like the only sign that I will give an excuse for being selfish, because if they're not, everything else gets unbalanced. So if they make a decision that seems abrupt and it's like not fair, nothing too crazy, but if they make a decision where they choose themselves first, I'll respect them for it because I understand how difficult that can be. If not, then you might get this whole stereotype of like Libras being lying Libras because they're lying to save face because they don't want to address the situation. So if a Libra comes up to you and tells you, and Libra by like heavy Libra energy tells you exactly how they feel about something and why they have to make a decision, I respect that a lot more than going the other way because they can definitely do that as well. So that comes into part as well with the superficial nature of Libra, where it's like, I'm going to fit into a social circle and do what needs to be done to make myself be presented and have a value, but then have no true deep intention with what is going on. And that could be kind of a problem. Now, going into Venus, let's talk about it. So, Venus rules over Taurus and Libra, right? It's a co-rulership, and I like to think of Taurus as the older, whether it's masculine or feminine, but specifically for Venus, feminine person that is very grounded. I like to think of the Empress. I believe the Empress card and the Queen, if I remember Pentacles, they're both Venus in Taurus in those cards. And it's really just being like, I have the finances, I have the beauty, and I have the hierarchy set up. And it almost gives me like Leo energy when I think of Venus and Taurus, because it's like, if you know any Venus and Taurus people or Venusians, they need the stability. And I tell people that like a lot of people think that the Martian signs of like Aries and Scorpio are the ones that you should be afraid of. But I'm like, no, you should be afraid of Venusians. If a Venusian does not get what they want, after a period of time, they will get what they want. And I think it'll be more calculated. And because of the fact that they are a giver and they have love and they give you a source of energy, instead of being the ones to be receiving it, when a Venusian person is constantly helping you and they decide to unplug, that's more sharper than a Martian person unplugging because you kind of expect it. You kind of already assume this person's going to get mad, they're going to pull the plug. But a Venus person, especially like Libra, maybe like a Libra moon, is like here today, gone the next, but it's like you should have caught it, right? And that's where the location of where you have Venus or the location of Libra in the chart can have a very big emphasis on that tipping of the scales. And with this, obviously, love and beauty come into play. in partnerships and relationships, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the seventh house. But I will definitely say a cool thing to do is look at where you do have Venus in your chart and looking at the sign you have Venus. So let's say you have Venus in Capricorn, or actually, I'll just use the example of the current transits right now. So Venus is currently, if I remember, in Libra. It's actually uh, in its domicile. So Venus is in Libra. Libra is in the ninth house. So now I kind of want to look, because the ninth house is ruled by Jupiter, what are the aspects of Jupiter in this chart and where is it touching? So it's squaring Saturn. And that's the current thing right now that Jupiter is doing. So I now want to look at Venus and say Venus in Libra is having a very expansive nature because of the fact that the ninth house being the ruler of Jupiter, and Jupiter is in a mercurial sign. So I look at this and I think Venus in this chart, if this was a person's chart, is very keen on looking for different ways to satisfy itself. Because the energy of, let me actually draw this out because I'm realizing how crazy this sounds. But with this ninth house here, Jupiter and Gemini in the fifth house is very much looking for its satisfaction. It's looking for the way to get what it wants. And the energy of Jupiter with Venus in Libra is that looking for what it needs in its own values. I don't want to say it will never be satisfied, but it's definitely going to be looking for the best potential suitor versus a Venus in Libra that might be in the eighth house. That to me, and depending on where Scorpio or Mars could be in the chart, is like going to be a little bit more conflicted. So it might be a little bit more reserved to protect itself in that sort of way. I'm going to move on. Okay, so Venus is darkness. Venus is like, yin and yang and the polarity. So Venus itself needs to always be receiving. And because of this, it is our comfort and our luxury, but also if we feel good, people should feel good around us. And that's the idea of the way you dress is the way that people might receive you or the energy you carry. So when someone has an afflicted Venus in their chart, I kind of like to look at their childhood trauma, especially because if they have a conflicted Venus and it's like squaring Saturn or it has a opposition to Uranus, something like that, I like to see how the person grew up because typically the interaction of the childhood will show either a codependent or a suppressive nature of that Venus, and then that Venus then plays out in the way that they choose to date. They choose to see themselves, their comfort, and that's a little bit of like an advanced technique, but it's very, very, very useful because sometimes, like, you might see a Leo Venus, and someone not understanding this might say, "Oh, the Leo Venus, they're very uppity. They're very much needing to be pampered, right?" But then it might be squared to like Scorpio, like Neptune and Scorpio in that generation, and then it's kind of very quiet. It's kind of very like not even pompous, but it's very like don't even look at me, right? Because the Venus is also understanding itself while it knows it should be worth more, and that creates a whole blend of understanding that Venus in itself for everyone. Never look at a chart and say this is the exact same thing. You can look at the chart and find patterns based upon what we know to be assumed for a placement. Now, Venus, of course, is the embodiment of the feminine energy, and I always tell people Venus in Libra is ditzy fairy princess. Venus in Taurus is I love to thrift, stay home, eat good food, and leave me. Well, I'm not gonna say that alone, but leave me alone. It's like a very different contrast, but they both are able to do things in general that pleasure them. The Venus in Libra does want company. It does definitely want to go out. It definitely wants to be a part of a clique and have a social circle, but it will also do self-care. It will also create like a Pinterest board. It will also create a lifestyle that it's at the center and it has different things that it can pick from. That's the air quality. The Venus in Taurus is definitely like, I just need stability, and then from there we can like figure everything else out and see how it goes. And this is just a little bit of cherry on top info. Obviously, I talked about the values. Because Venus is ruled by Taurus, Taurus being in the second house, Venus also rules the seventh house because it rules Libra. We see the whole definition of where we get Venus is seen as values, material, wealth, self worth, and then also the seventh house aspect, which is partnerships, marriage. Um, I think one-to-one relationships might be a little bit more Scorpio, the eighth house, but that's also one-to-one non-intimate relationships as well. Okay, let's talk about the descendant. If you guys want to drop in the chat what your descendant is, if you want to, using whole signs, the descendant of the hour right now as we record this is Leo. And with this being Leo, my go-to thing is that the rising sign that you have, being yourself, is what is perceived in the world, right? The descendant is the opposite, and therefore it is what that you should aim to have be your friend. Because these are the type of people that you actually should vibe well with. And that's why when we do look at synastry in a chart, this is typically the area or the sign that you want to see a person that you're with have a lot of placements, whether it's friendships, relationships. Obviously, if there are aspects in the chart that are there, that can create a problem, right, between them. So I always like to look at the fourth house, and then I always like to look at the way the 10th house is aligned because these create an axis. And if you look, the 10th house squares the 7th house, the 4th house also squares the 7th house, and the 1st house opposes the 7th house. So with all of this happening, I always like to think, the moment I know what the person's rising sign is, I can immediately think, what is their descendant? What's their 10th and 4th? And what are the signs? What is the axis of what it is that, yes, your rising is your ascendant. They're like inter, internamed. Um, the North Node is not the same as the rising sign. The North Node is actually this right here. Um, but yeah, so seeing with this being a Leo descendant, meaning the seventh house is ruled by Leo, I immediately think of that, you know, having a person with a large amount of Scorpio placements might be a difficult thing because of the way that they might represent you in your career and your higher legacy of your ego. And it might be a bit difficult if it's a Taurus. Not as much, to be honest, because the fourth house, it would give you some sort of like healing, most likely with the square, something you need to address in your childhood, but it would still be unpleasant and uneasily harmonious. If we think about the fact that we want the seventh house to be harmonious with what it is that we are dealing with. If you come home, you don't want to have to be fighting your partner. You don't want to have to constantly be thinking about what it is that you have to do, right? You want to kind of have harmony, right? And that's why the seventh house, being the absolute opposite of the first house, is masculine, feminine, Aries versus Libra, Mars versus Venus. You want it to be soft. If you're coming home from basically fighting all day, meaning like the masculine going out with Aries, you want to be able to come home and be like soft and not be constantly stressed. So that's why the planet that's there also creates a very important um, it creates a very important aspect of the relationship. Having a Saturn on the descendant, that's a tough one. That's a very tough one if you have it natally, but also if the person that you are interested in has it on your descendant and vice versa. And that kind of, when you do look at Venus and you do look at the aspects of the seventh house, you can kind of start to see as well a power structure, right? Because the seventh house is about the balance, when you're writing contracts for some business owners, I've definitely looked at the people that they're trying to get into business with because I'll look at their seventh house and also their 10th house. If the 7th house and the 10th house are squaring each other, I like to look and see who has the power, or if it's like a mutual respect of power. Because if we're getting into a partnership, oh, that's not how you spell that, or a contract, I want to see how it's going to affect the status, right, or legacy of the person that is getting the contract with themselves. So, like person A, the person that's signing the contract would be person B into person's A legacy. I want to see how they affect them with that because of the square. It's going to be something that might be a little bit of friction or it might not. The descendant is always in the seventh, it's the line. If you don't use whole sign, what you'll kind of see is that, and this is why I always advocate for it, the chart application, if you have the correct time, the descendant will be outlined, right? So in Placidius, this moon is in the sixth house. That means the because of the rising, it is not exactly it's not exactly pretty, I guess you could say. And therefore, the descendant would be right here. And then the moon would be in that sixth house, right? And that's why I like to use whole sign because it just makes it very clear for people and so they don't get like mixed up. Uh, all right. So, yeah, you're very welcome. Okay, so I talked a little bit about getting to become friends with people on the descendant, but there is this one thing I really want to talk about. And the descendant truly is the side of you that isn't seen, right? And if you want to think about that, if Aries is the, oh, that's not, okay, here we go. If Aries is the masculine energy, and then Venus is the feminine energy, then you really have to just think about that simply and just say, okay, um, I am showing people the sun, aka me, right? I'm showing people the sun, and therefore Venus is the moon. It is the part that is not seen. It is the veil, it's the nighttime, it's the shadow. And so, because of this, if you have planets in that seventh house and you're not self aware, that could be dangerous because you could be walking around. When you do get into a close interpersonal connection with someone, that seventh house is now fully active. That now becomes like the sun because that's the intimate behind the door, like curtain type of thing where it's like no one really understands what is going on. And for lack of better terms, I'll just say like your weird side, right? That no one like this is me trying to make a curtain and then like someone behind there. Okay, that's not a good drawing, but like that's the side of you that people aren't going to see. So it's very much like an easy way I like to tell people is that like some people use social media and they like present their full selves, and then some people use social media as a brand. And if you use it as a brand, then the descendant is maybe the Finsta account or the other like private story. It's the side of you that you don't share with everyone. So when you have that, you really want to be self-aware because if I use our chart example again, an Aquarius rising is different. Everyone's going to see them as being different, right? Because Aquarius, in general, wants to stick out. It wants to be counterculture. But then, if you think about that, if you're constantly known to be different everywhere you're going outside, when you come home, you don't want your partner to think you're different as well. You're going to want to feel included. You're going to want to be praise. That's kind of where like the Leo aspect of it in a relationship, an Aquarius rising really just wants to be praised. Like they really just want not like worship praise, but more like, hey, I see what you did. Hey, I see the thing that you did. It's like amazing. You're not so different. Like people don't understand. They want to feel good about what makes them different, right? Let's say we actually use a different rising. So let's just say we use a why is this? Oh, I'm going by 3 years. Yikes. We are in 2024. Let's do that. Let's go by 1.5 hours, 3 years. All right. Um, what's a rising sign? If you guys have one, I'll just pick, for now, I'll pick Virgo. If you guys have any risings you want me to look at. So, Virgo rising, for instance, on the outside, they want everyone to think they're perfect. They want everyone to think that they have everything under the bag, that they can handle it, they can do the impossible, and they can, because that fourth house and 10th house, and it's gonna get it done. And that eighth house will be damned if you tell it otherwise. However, that descendant is struggling for its life. The seventh house descendant in Pisces is really kind of getting tripped up on who your real friends are. And in an intimate partnership, I can definitely say that the seventh house in Pisces is definitely wanting to be seen and just free. It wants to just be free. It wants to, it's not even just being like um without rules or anything, but it just wants to feel like there's nothing holding it back. Like it gets to love, it gets to be in harmony. And so when I look at this, I always tell Virgo risings whenever they're getting into contracts with people, make sure that everything is written out. Because if you're descendant, I look at this descendant and I think about it as a back door. Because of the way that it's Pisces, I really think about it as a back door because it's so easy to just get like lost in the sauce. The 10th house being Gemini is like trying to take on too many things at a time, and the fourth house is being very ambitious because of what probably was wanted during childhood. So that seventh house is like such a backdoor to me, and I really like to tell them to be aware of that. Okay, so Gemini rising, I can do that one for you. So Gemini rising, this one's not too bad. This one's actually fun for people who have this, just because seventh house being Sagittarius is just being the life of the party everywhere you go and being able to socialize so easy. And if we're putting Sagittarius in the sign of Libra, this is honestly like a steroid, I think, because Libra and Sag get along really well. Fire and air gets along. You know, it's there's a sextile that's created between these two. It's like a 45-degree angle between the ninth and the seventh. But it's really amazing when you have this chart because it's like when it gets in contact with high energy people, it becomes like this centrifuge of like energy that just keeps going and going and going and going, and it can just keep talking and it won't stop because every single person comes in here and it's like a generator for this chart. And at times, because of this, I look at the 10th house and I say that it can definitely not just be lost in the sauce, but it can be like, what are you really doing? Because no one knows. And it comes from being expected to do so much in childhood with that fourth house Virgo and wanting to have a secure structure. But then, like, if we really investigate it, it's like, what are you really doing? Because the seventh house in Sag is having a lot of fun. Really cool adventure people, though. Okay, so I kind of talked about this with the influence of the seventh house. And if you guys ever want, if you have other charts, can definitely bring some more up. I can pull up some charts at the end after we're done with the recording and do some synastry charts of famous people to give that as an example. But if you really want good synastry, I always tell people look at sun and moon because that's masculine and feminine already, right? Regardless if you're a man or woman or both or neither. You still want to see what the sun and moon is doing in the chart. You also want to see how Venus and Mars are interacting in the chart. That's also like sun and moon in its own retrospect. But really cute synastry will be like moon having an aspect to Mercury, right? A person's feeling understood, and another person is able to speak to them directly to their emotions. Sun and moon is really amazing because someone's moon on your sun means they can brighten what it is that you feel, and then for the other person, you emotionally support them so that they know that they are who they are. I love those two different synastry combinations. There's a lot more, but we'll get into that as we keep going. So, given that you guys do know your risings, I won't stick to this, but I will say knowing where your rising sign is, knowing where Libra is in your chart is definitely a big key thing. Wherever you have Libra in your chart, I like to tell people is it's the area, if you do know the correct house, where you want to be as balanced as you can. Not just because Libra is balanced, but it is the place in your chart that gets audited the most because Libra is such an outside person facing, having people know you type of placement that you really want to make sure that, like, if you have Libra in the second house, your finances are going to be seen, right? If you have an 11th house, the friendships that you have, the network has to be constantly thought about, right? In the 10th house, the career, the legacy that you go for is definitely going to be probably numerous because it's an air sign, 10th house, but it's going to be the beautification. It might be hair, it might be interior design, it might be going places to make things more beautiful. These are all very big, important factors. So, that being said, I have been talking quite a bit. I'm going to go ahead and pause. I'm going to give you guys like a 5-minute break so that you can use restroom or anything like that, and then you'll be able to come back. So I'm going to go ahead and continue, and we'll finish off these slides. I don't have too much, and it'll just be an hour, I think, or so, and then you guys can ask me questions if you have any after. So I talked about the seventh house a lot more earlier on, but just to go over it once again with how it really relates you to other people. And I think if you really want to know how to, if you were a diplomat and you weren't trying to be malicious, but you really wanted to understand people, you would pull every single one of their charts and find what their seventh house is. Because once you have the rising sign, you know a person's seventh house, and you understand their fourth and 10th house, and you understand who they are, where they're coming from, how they interact, and where it is they want to go. That's 1, 4, 7, 10. You know, that's why I think the rising sign, if you got it, you won. You know, then you got the seventh house, and from there you can really, not to put people in small categories because every planet and aspects affect, but it really lets you read and understand, right? You really want to make sure you understand your own seventh house so that way you don't project onto people what that seventh house is. Very important. Whether it's with transits, whether it's looking at your progress chart or your solar chart, you really want to look at what that seventh house is. And I've given some examples. So when you have Venus in the seventh house, it's a very strong desire for love, but something to note is the more planets you have in your seventh house, the more kind of codependent you become. A very strong seventh house stellium needs to feel balanced because planets are in the seventh house by having relationships, meaning it needs to be in that in order to express and learn. Um, the the house that you have Venus in will also translate to show you if Venus is in the eighth house, you have to learn how to love yourself through relationships. That's pretty painful. If Venus is in the 11th house, you have to learn how to love yourself in a group setting of other people. In the 10th, how to love yourself even through what it is that you're looking for in your legacy. So it really implicates a lot, right? I talked about Saturn earlier and I said how that's difficult. It's because, especially in our current society, where it's not so as traditional as it was, not that it has to be, but Saturn in the seventh house is going to struggle more now than it did back in the day because Saturn in the seventh wants a long term, stable relationship. Whereas now people are not as long term and stable as they once were. So Saturn in the seventh house is having more of a difficult time, where a Jupiter in the seventh house might have been suffering in the 1940s, but now it's just it's thriving because there's more than abundance, and it's okay to do so with the times. If that makes sense. Okay, so last but not least, I'm going to get into the planetary dignities and then pretty much be wrapping up. So, as per usual, the domicile is where it wants to be. It's the home sign. The detriment is the challenging position as to where the energy of the planet can kind of be weakened and have very, very difficulty expressing itself. The exaltation is like beautiful. It's just like a steroid, and to where it can get the sign can get its best benefits. And the fall is kind of where it's just hard to express, but I look at the detriment to be worse than a fall. It's just like detriment is kind of like if we have a fire hydrant, a domicile is being able to use a fire hydrant. A detriment would be, well, not being able to get any water to come out the fire hydrant while the house is on fire. Exaltation would be like the fire hydrant weighing like 2 pounds, and even a baby could use it to blow out the fire. And then a fall would kind of just be the fact that there's so much water and you can't control it. So it's like you got a fire and a house burning, and now you have a fire hydrant that's shooing water everywhere, and you can't control it. It might hit the house, and then it might not. It might actually mess up the other firefighters. So it's not exactly the best thing ever. So for Libra, Libra is its domicile. Venus is the domicile of Libra, right? And that's where it wants to be. It wants to feel at home, right? The balance. I get to be loved. I get to have harmony. I get to have the best alignment. And these are all the qualities of Venus. Its detriment is in Mars. So Mars in Libra is actually difficult because it's the opposite. Mars wants to be in Aries, and Aries is the opposite of Venus, I'm sorry, of Libra. And so it's just opposites. Now, Mars, because it's so forward going and it wants to get something done, and the aggression that it has, it cannot be diplomatic. Where Libra's trying to be diplomatic. So it's like a Mars and Venus type of thing. And, because of this, Mars and Libra can like not commit to something, back out of something very easily, and really just get cold feet very quickly. And with Saturn, that's the exaltation of Libra. And it's kind of like when I first heard this, I was like, what? Why would Saturn want to be in Libra? Um, but now I get it. Now I really understand. And the reason for that is because Saturn doesn't just really want to be cold. And I've kind of adopted, depending on giving it the chart look, I really think Saturn's like an older feminine, like established grandma in like a family in some sense, because Saturn wants you to understand how to have discipline, structure, and responsibility. It doesn't want to have to be cold, but 9 out of 10 times it does because we're little children that don't want to listen, right? And so at its best, Saturn can actually bring you balance in your life. You can have some cookies, but you can't have the whole jar, right? Versus a lot of people go in a lot and they have too many cookies, and then out of nowhere, it's like, well, now we got to take the whole jar away. And that's where like Saturn can be seen as cold, right? Now, in the fall, the sun is fall in Libra. Now, let's think about that. The sun likes to be in Aries, right? So the opposite of Aries is Libra. And so if the sun has its exaltation in Libra, the opposite of that would be, sorry, in Aries, the opposite of that would be Libra. And also, a nice little fun little thing to think about as well is that Libra season marks the start of fall, literally, seasonally. And so, as I was saying about the hemispheres, with like day and night in the chart, because of this, like we're looking at, I think it might be flipped. I always confuse, but um, I always think Libra's like the door. Libra's the door between fall and summer. And also, as we get more and more into Libra season the rest of the year, there's less daytime during the there's less light during the day. And so it's literally the start of fall. And so it's a very simple, easy thing to always remember. Now, the sun in Libra, it doesn't know how to be itself. That's also another reason why. Because the sun in Aries wants to just go after what it wants. That's why it's exalted there. It's Leo, where it has its structure, right? The sun is domiciled in Leo, but it gets to really be attacking to what it desires in Aries. But in Libra, it has to sit back and be like, well, I want to be fair to the thieves, but also the people that caught the thieves. I want to have balance between the two so it can struggle with self-expression, right? Having a sun in the seventh house can kind of be a difficult thing because you are always looking at how it is that you fit in with other people. Having Mercury there could be very difficult because you're always seeing both sides. Playing devil's advocate may be a little too much, right? And so that is pretty much the planetary dignities of this. And that's pretty much it. I do always add the aspects just to go over. The squares create more of a frustration. The oppositions make it very difficult. And, the oppositions really teach you the energy of Libra because opposites have to be balanced. And that's Libra and its gist. And then if you have trines, it does harmonize very well to me, but you have to grow into it. And sextiles are the easiest energy outside of conjunctions that puts everything together. And that is pretty much it. Thank you guys for being here.